Hey lady friends, welcome to Become a Podcast Queen. Are you a coach, a consultant, a network marketer, a thought leader, an entrepreneur, a keynote or public speaker, or a creative type? Perhaps you're a hobby podcaster or have a podcast of your own for your business. If so, then you're in the right place. This is a podcast for the heart-centered and bold, badass woman who wants to find, use, and amplify her own unique voice to become an absolute powerhouse in her own podcast. If you're ready to pour your passion and purpose into your very own podcast and have a positive impact and influence in the world while making an income at the same time, then please join me in these empowering conversations. Learn all of my secrets around getting your podcast up and off the ground, speaking your dreams into existence, marketing and promoting your podcast, elevating your brand awareness, growing your downloads and listenership while attracting paying clients and paying customers through the power of podcasting. My name is Olivia Powell, your hostess with the mostest. I'm an international podcast and business coach and a mentor to female entrepreneurs. Tune in each episode for tons of helpful insights, actionable steps to implement straight into your own podcast so that you can put your best work out there into the world. I am here to help you harness the power of podcasting to guide and inspire you to elegantly strap on those lady balls, grab the mic and press record. Are you ready to birth and build your podcast while becoming a queen at podcasting at the same time? We don't wait until we're ready. We unapologetically crown and anoint ourselves to deliver our message. Are you with me? Let's dive in. Welcome back, podcast queens. Today we're talking about what is a podcast and how does podcasting work? Which is pretty funny because this is a podcast about podcasts. The irony. Well, if you're listening to this, chances are you already know what a podcast is, and you've probably been even listening to podcasts for a while. However, podcasting is a growing industry, and there are still a lot of people in the world that don't actually know what podcasts are, how they work, how they listen to them, and so on. So this episode is to give you a better idea about podcasting, and also make it easier to explain to other people. If you can't be bothered explaining it, you can always send them this quick little episode to do the work for you. So I've had people ask me what a podcast is, and I'm happy to oblige and tell them because once upon a time, I didn't even know what they were, and I didn't have any interest in listening to them either. I thought they were completely irrelevant until I listened to my very first podcast. You can hear the story about it in previous episodes, and it completely rocked my world. Ever since I started listening to that podcast, I've never stopped. I am, as they say, quote unquote, #obsessed. So the term podcast is actually a combination of two things. It comes from the word iPod, which is, as we know, a personal digital audio player made by Apple. And the second word is broadcast. So they've put those together, iPod, broadcast, and made podcast. So to break it down in the easiest and simplest form of explaining it, it's similar to a radio show, but it's not quite the same. You don't really turn on a podcast like you would with your car radio, for example. Instead, you download episodes and listen to them through your device, whether that be whatever you want to call it, depending on what part of the world you're from, whether that be a mobile, a smartphone, a cell phone, whatever it is you want to call it, which means essentially you can listen to podcasts anytime you want through the internet or by downloading it, which is, as I said, you can do through your phone. The great thing about podcasts is that you can listen to it at any time that you want, with or without the internet. The other thing too is instead of listening to, for example, random radio hosts talk about whatever they want to talk about, which could be 100 plus different random topics, some that might interest you, some that might not, you don't really know what they're going to talk about until it kind of happens, you get to actually select the podcast that you want to listen to. You get to select, something according to your own interest or topics that you want to hear about, subjects. Maybe you want to listen to something about a hobby that you do like gardening or whatever, or certain genre. This is the great thing about podcasting is that you actually are in more control in a sense because you get to control what you want to learn about and hear about instead of just listening to some radio hosts ramble on about, whatever that may or may not interest you. And this is the other great thing about podcasting too, is that most podcasts are about something. Most of them have a niche. So you get to listen from wherever you want around the world to whatever topic you want to listen to, and the control is in your hands, which is wonderful. And instead of it being one big, long, continuous segment interrupted with ads and songs like you'd hear on the radio, a podcast is different. There are recorded episodes, as I said, you can access at any time, and you can press pause and listen to it later, which is what I sometimes do when I'm listening to a really long podcast episode of someone's, whether it be, half an hour or an hour or 90 minutes. I might listen to the start of it while I'm driving somewhere. I might get to my destination, hit pause, and then listen to it later on the ride home, for example. And all podcast episodes are varying in length. It can be 2 minutes long, it can be 20 minutes, it can be 2 hours. It's totally dependent on the host. With radio shows, they only reach the geographical area that they serve. So, for example, if you live in a major city, the radio show might only cater to that city. If you travel to another city, you probably wouldn't be able to hear it, right? There'd be other radio shows around. Podcasts are also evergreen content. So with the radio, for example, you'd listen to a segment and you might not ever hear it again. It's gone into the cyber wilderness, see you later sort of thing. Whereas a podcast, you can re-listen to that episode if you want. You can rewind, you can fast forward, you can re-listen, you can skip episodes, but you can always come back to it because it's evergreen, which is wonderful. It's kind of like YouTube videos in a sense. You know, if you've got a YouTube channel and you've got all those YouTube videos on there, podcasting's the same thing, but in an audio format. So you can always kind of go back to it and re-listen to it, if that makes sense. Or as you would to a YouTube video where you re-watch something, you just re-listen to a podcast episode. Listeners typically subscribe to a podcast. So once you find a podcast that you like, and you like the content, you like the host, whatever it is that you like about this person or podcast, you click subscribe so that you can regularly listen to them. The next episode will automatically download once you've finished the particular episode that you're listening to, which is great. So you don't have to keep checking manually for updates. I know for me with the podcasts that I've subscribed to through my podcast app, they're all there in like a menu. So I can just go into the menu and click whatever podcast I feel like listening to that day. And if that particular host has got any new episodes that have been uploaded or revealed, it'll have like a little red tag with the number of new episodes there. So I know, oh, this podcast host has a new episode. I'm going to listen to her podcast, and then I'll go ahead and do that and catch up. So yes, podcasts are episodic, which means they do have episodes like TV series. So every time that there's like a new series that comes out, you know, a new episode of that series, it's the same thing with podcasting. People who tend to listen to podcasts usually consume a lot of them. They tend to binge out on episodes, kind of like if you were to watch or binge on Netflix. There's also a thing called video podcasting. So I don't want to go too much into this because it's more about, you know, sticking with like the authentic audio podcasting. But just so you know, there are a lot of podcasters out there that do actually record the video of their podcast so they can upload that to different platforms like YouTube, for example. So it's kind of like killing two birds with one stone because you're doing the podcast recording with your mic, but it's also able to be uploaded onto YouTube because you've got that visual aspect as well, which is actually a really smart thing to do in this day and age, to be honest with you. Podcasting is easily accessible. I remember actually back when I first got into listening to podcasts, when I first heard about it, I was like, oh, that sounds too techie and too technical. I don't want to have to try and find it. It sounds hard. Whereas I just had to click like 2 links and I was like, boom, listening to my first podcast episode. And I was like, wow, this is easier than what I thought. And this is so much more awesome than what I thought. So podcast listeners tend to be quite loyal. Once they find podcasts and hosts that they love, they usually stick with them. And you're probably wondering who actually listens to podcasts. So according to Edison Research, which is like the holy grail or the pinnacle of podcasting stats and stuff like that, apparently the most popular group are people between the ages of 25 and 34 years old. There's a listenership of 28% of the population, which is really cool and happens to be my target market in podcasting. Well, not completely, like between 25 and probably 50 is my target market, but you know, it's good to know that the majority of people are aged between 25 and 34 that are into podcasting, and that's my ideal avatar. This is closely followed by 35 to 44-year-olds at 21%. So that's awesome. That's the second largest group. The third largest group at 18%, believe it or not, is 18-year-olds to 24-year-olds. And the least common age group is 65 plus, probably because podcasting, you know, hasn't been around for super long like the radio, for example. And also because it's considered, I guess, a bit more techie and a bit more modern and that sort of thing. You know, a lot of people over 65 are probably kind of like, I don't need to worry about that. You know, so it kind of makes sense. It's also good to know what kind of categories are out there for podcasts too, especially if you're wanting to create your own one so you know what's available. So I'm going to rattle through all the different categories and then give you the most popular categories at the moment. And there are top 5 most popular categories currently. And this is taking into consideration coronavirus as well. So this list is from the iTunes podcast category list. And as I speak through these guys, I want you to think about where your podcast sits on this category. And if you ever decide to pivot your podcast into a different direction, remember to actually change the category that your podcast is in. So the podcast categories are arts, and within arts, you've got things like books, design, fashion and beauty, food, performing arts, and visual arts. The second category is business. So that's what this podcast is actually in, which is careers, entrepreneurship, investing, management, marketing, and non-for-profit. The third category is comedy. So you've got comedy interviews, improv, and stand-up. The next category is education, which can include courses, how to do stuff. It says how to, but I just say how to do stuff makes more sense. Language learning and self-improvement. So that could be personal development too, guys. The next category is fiction. So that can involve comedy fiction, drama, and science fiction. The next category is government. There's no subcategories to this one, so I'm assuming maybe that one's not as popular perhaps. I'm not too sure. The next one is history. The next one after that is health and fitness. So that can involve alternative health, fitness, medicine, mental health, nutrition, and sexuality. The next category is kids and family. So this includes education for kids, parenting, pets and animals, and stories for kids. The next category is leisure. So this involves animation and manga, automotive, aviation, crafts, games, hobbies, home and garden, and video games. The next category is music, which includes music commentary, music history, music interviews, and we've got 2 left, people. The second last one is news. So the news can include business news, daily news, entertainment news, news commentary, politics, sports news, and tech news. Actually, no, we've got a few more because I'm just reading from my screen. The next one is religion and spirituality. So that can involve Buddhism, Christianity, Hindu, Islam, spirituality, Judaism, the whole kit and caboodle if you think about it. There's just a couple named there. You've got science, you've got society and culture, sports, technology, true crime, TV and film. I won't go into all of them. You guys can do your own research on that if you like. Otherwise, this podcast will go for like an hour. But as you can see, there's so many different topics, interests, and hobbies available to you that you can either listen to as a podcast listener, or I hope that actually gave you some ideas if you want to start your own podcast as to what it could be about or where your podcast category would be. So the top 5 most popular categories at the moment, including, our time with coronavirus, happens to be society and culture, which makes sense, doesn't it? Business, because a lot of people, understandably have been struggling with income, careers, losing jobs. So starting a business has been one of the best times ever to do that. You've got comedy, which I assume is chosen because people want something that's a bit more lighthearted and fun and uplifting because, when we're being bombarded with all the negative stuff in the news, you can, crave a bit more happy stuff. You've got news and politics, which makes sense. And then you've got health, so now that the gyms, the gyms are reopening now, but just a few months ago, all the gyms were closed. People were being challenged in a new way to look after their health, not being able to eat out as well. So once again, it makes sense that that's such a popular category. So I trust that's helped you. Feel free to reach out to me if you've got any questions, but that's the basic overview of what a podcast is and how they work. So I look forward to talking to you all in the next episode. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and listening in. I truly, truly appreciate you and your listenership. I really do. And if you happen to love this episode, feel free to share it with someone to join my podcast quest of empowering more and more women to rise up, find and use their own voices to unlock a podcast of full self-expression, creativity, and freedom. I can't wait for you to show up, share your story, and serve others through your own podcast. And if you want help to achieve this and receive more personalized care, then feel free to email me at oliviapowcoaching@gmail.com to book a consult. Or you can join the conversation in my free Facebook group by searching Become a Podcast Queen Community. If you want to hang out on Instagram, search me at Olivia Power Coaching. See you in the next episode, Queens.